Question 1. The efficiency study reveals that a new Cisco Webex application designed to enhance team collaboration requires access to user presence information and chat message content to provide real-time status updates and contextually relevant suggestions. The development team is considering how to handle this data to ensure compliance with data privacy regulations. Which approach best balances functionality with user privacy and regulatory adherence? Option A. Collect all available user presence data and chat message content by default, assuming users implicitly consent by using the application, and store this data unencrypted on a publicly accessible server for easy access by the development team for future improvements. Option B. Implement a feature that explicitly requests user consent before accessing presence information and chat message content, clearly explaining what data will be collected, why it is needed for the application's core functionality, and how it will be secured. Only collect data after affirmative consent is provided and store it using industry-standard encryption. Option C. Collect only the user's online/offline status from presence information, and only analyze chat message content for keywords related to meeting scheduling, ignoring all other message content, without seeking explicit user consent, as this is considered necessary for the application's core function. Option D. Collect all user presence data and chat message content. Store it encrypted, but do not inform users about the specific data being collected or the purpose, as this information is considered proprietary to the application's functionality and not essential for user understanding. Correct answer is A. Collect all available user presence data and chat message content by default, assuming users implicitly consent by using the application, and store this data unencrypted on a publicly accessible server for easy access by the development team for future improvements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in developing integrated solutions for Cisco Webex, balancing the need for robust data security and privacy with the functional requirements of an application that interacts with sensitive user information. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying the relevant data privacy regulations to the specific context of Webex application development, ensuring that user data is handled responsibly and ethically without hindering legitimate application functionality. Developers must navigate the nuances of consent, data minimization, and secure storage, all while adhering to the principles of the specified regulatory framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes explicit user consent for data collection and processing, aligns with the principles of data minimization by collecting only necessary information, and implements robust security measures for data storage and transmission. This aligns directly with the core tenets of data privacy regulations, which emphasize user control over their personal information and the responsibility of data controllers to protect that information. By seeking explicit consent, the application respects user autonomy. By minimizing data collection, it reduces the potential for misuse or breaches. By implementing strong security, it fulfills the duty of care to protect user data. This approach represents best professional practice because it proactively embeds privacy and security into the application's design, fostering user trust and ensuring compliance with legal obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that general terms of service implicitly grant consent for all data collection, even for features not directly related to the core functionality. This fails to meet the requirement for explicit, informed consent, a cornerstone of most data privacy regulations. It also violates the principle of data minimization by potentially collecting data that is not strictly necessary for the service provided. Another incorrect approach is to collect extensive user data without a clear, documented purpose, relying on the justification that it might be useful later. This directly contravenes the principle of purpose limitation, which mandates that data should only be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes and not further processed in a manner incompatible with those purposes. It also increases the risk surface for data breaches and potential misuse. A third incorrect approach is to store sensitive user data in an unencrypted format or transmit it over insecure channels, citing development convenience or perceived low risk. This represents a severe regulatory and ethical failure, as it demonstrates a disregard for the fundamental obligation to protect personal data from unauthorized access, disclosure, alteration, or destruction. Such practices are in direct violation of security requirements mandated by data privacy laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing applications for Cisco Webex must adopt a privacy by design and security by design methodology. This involves proactively considering data privacy and security implications at every stage of the development lifecycle. When faced with decisions about data handling, the professional reasoning process should involve 1. Identifying the specific data being handled and its sensitivity. 2. Determining the legitimate business purpose for collecting and processing this data. 3. Consulting the relevant data privacy regulations to understand the specific requirements for consent, data minimization, purpose limitation, and security. 4. Implementing technical and organizational measures to comply with these requirements. 5. Documenting all decisions and justifications related to data handling. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating privacy and security practices as regulations evolve and application functionality changes. This systematic approach ensures that applications are not only functional but also compliant, ethical, and trustworthy. Question 2. Regulatory review indicates that applications developed for Cisco Webex must adhere to strict data handling and privacy protocols. When integrating a new third-party service to enhance user experience within a Webex application, which approach best ensures compliance and minimizes security risks from a stakeholder perspective? Option A. Prioritize rapid deployment of the feature, deferring detailed security and compliance reviews until after the application has been launched to the user base. Option B. Conduct a thorough security and compliance assessment of the third-party service and its data handling practices before commencing integration, ensuring alignment with relevant regulations and organizational policies. Option C. Rely on the third-party service provider's assurances of compliance without independent verification, assuming their security measures are adequate. Option D. Implement the integration immediately and address any security or compliance concerns that arise during post-deployment monitoring. The correct answer is D. Implement the integration immediately and address any security or compliance concerns that arise during post-deployment monitoring. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid application development and the need for robust security and compliance, especially when dealing with sensitive data within a regulated environment like Cisco Webex. Developers must balance feature delivery with the imperative to protect user privacy and adhere to data handling regulations. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential vulnerabilities that could arise from integrating third-party services or custom code without adequate security vetting, which could lead to data breaches or non-compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive and integrated security and compliance strategy. By embedding security and compliance checks early in the development lifecycle, shift-left security, developers ensure that potential issues are identified and addressed before they become costly to fix or lead to regulatory violations. This aligns with the principles of secure software development and data protection regulations, which emphasize building security in from the start. For the DEVWBX exam, this means understanding how to leverage Webex APIs and SDKs in a manner that respects data privacy, implements appropriate access controls, and adheres to Cisco's own security guidelines and any applicable data residency requirements. This approach minimizes risk and ensures the application is built on a foundation of trust and compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that defers security and compliance to the end of the development cycle is professionally unacceptable. This creates significant regulatory and ethical failures. It increases the likelihood of discovering critical vulnerabilities or compliance gaps late in the process, potentially delaying deployment, incurring substantial remediation costs, or even leading to the application being deemed non-compliant. This reactive stance violates the principle of due diligence in data protection and security. An approach that ignores the specific data handling policies of the organization or the regulatory landscape governing the data processed by the Webex application is also professionally unacceptable. This can lead to breaches of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, resulting in severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. It demonstrates a failure to understand the scope of responsibility when developing applications that interact with potentially sensitive information. An approach that assumes all third-party integrations are inherently secure and compliant without independent verification is a critical failure. This overlooks the potential for vulnerabilities in external components, which can become vectors for attack or noncompliance. Professional practice demands rigorous vetting of all dependencies to ensure they meet security and regulatory standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing applications for Cisco Webex should adopt a risk-based approach, integrating security and compliance considerations throughout the entire development lifecycle. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the data being handled, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, if relevant to the exam's implied jurisdiction, Cisco's security best practices, and the security implications of every design choice and integration. A continuous assessment and validation process, including threat modeling, code reviews, and security testing, is crucial. When faced with choices, always prioritize the option that demonstrably reduces risk, enhances data protection, and ensures adherence to established policies and regulations, even if it requires more upfront effort. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates that a new application designed for Cisco Webex meetings is collecting extensive user metadata, including participant presence, screen sharing activity, and chat message content, with the intention of providing advanced analytics. The development team is considering how to best manage this data collection and usage in compliance with privacy standards, which approach best aligns with regulatory frameworks for data protection and ethical application development. Option A. Collect all available metadata from Webex meetings to ensure the analytics are as comprehensive as possible, and then attempt to anonymize the data before storage, assuming this process will satisfy privacy requirements. Option B. Focus solely on the application's functionality and performance, assuming that Cisco's platform compliance inherently covers all data handled by applications built upon it, and that user consent is adequately managed by the platform itself. Option C. Design the application to collect only the minimum metadata strictly necessary for its core analytical functions, obtain explicit user consent for any additional data collection, and implement application-specific security measures beyond the platform's baseline. Option D. Implement robust encryption for all collected data and rely on the existing Webex platform's security to protect it, while informing users of the data collection in the application's terms of service. The correct answer is D. Implement robust encryption for all collected data and rely on the existing Webex platform's security to protect it, while informing users of the data collection in the application's terms of service. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data privacy and security within the context of developing applications for Cisco Webex. The core difficulty lies in balancing the functional requirements of an application with the stringent regulatory obligations concerning the handling of sensitive user data. Developers must navigate the complexities of data minimization, consent management, and secure storage, all while ensuring the application meets its intended purpose. Failure to do so can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of user trust. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for unintended data exposure or misuse if privacy considerations are not integrated from the initial design phase. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a privacy-by-design methodology, aligning with the principles of data protection regulations. This involves proactively identifying and mitigating privacy risks throughout the development lifecycle. Specifically, it means only collecting data that is absolutely necessary for the application's core functionality, thereby adhering to the principle of data minimization. Furthermore, it necessitates obtaining explicit and informed consent from users before collecting or processing their data, ensuring transparency and user control. Implementing robust security measures to protect this data, both in transit and at rest, is also paramount. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory requirements for data protection, such as those found in the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, if the jurisdiction were the EU or similar frameworks in other regions. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical data handling and builds user confidence by prioritizing their privacy rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. Collecting all available user data and then attempting to anonymize it later is a flawed approach. This violates the principle of data minimization as it involves collecting more data than is strictly necessary. The subsequent anonymization process may also be imperfect, leading to potential re-identification risks and regulatory noncompliance. Relying solely on end-user agreements to cover all data collection practices without explicit, granular consent is also problematic. While terms of service are necessary, they do not absolve developers of the responsibility to obtain specific consent for different types of data processing, especially for sensitive information. This can be seen as an attempt to circumvent direct consent requirements, which is ethically questionable and legally risky. Assuming that data stored within the Webex platform is inherently secure and requires no additional application-level security measures is another significant failure. While Cisco provides a secure platform, applications built on top of it have their own security responsibilities. Developers must implement their own security protocols to protect data handled by their specific application, as vulnerabilities can exist at the application layer regardless of platform security. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing applications for Cisco Webex must adopt a proactive and ethical stance towards data privacy and security. The decision-making process should begin with a thorough understanding of the relevant data protection regulations applicable to the target user base. This involves conducting a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, early in the development cycle to identify potential risks. Developers should then prioritize privacy by design principles, integrating privacy considerations into every stage of development, from architecture to implementation. This includes implementing data minimization, robust consent mechanisms, and strong security controls. When faced with choices about data collection or processing, the default should always be the option that offers the highest level of user privacy and regulatory compliance. Continuous monitoring and auditing of data handling practices are also essential to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations and best practices. Question 4. Cost-benefit analysis shows that integrating a new AI-powered sentiment analysis feature into a Cisco Webex application could significantly enhance user engagement by providing real-time feedback on conversation tone. However, this feature would process message content, which may include sensitive personal information. Considering the regulatory framework for the 300-920 developing applications for Cisco Webex and Webex devices, DEVWBX exam, which approach best balances innovation with compliance and user trust. Option A. Conduct a thorough privacy impact assessment, clearly define the data processing scope and purpose, implement robust consent mechanisms for users, and ensure data minimization and strong security controls before and during development. Option B. Develop the feature quickly to capture market advantage and address any potential privacy concerns or regulatory issues retrospectively as they arise. Option C. Implement the sentiment analysis feature without explicit user consent, relying on the argument that the data processed is aggregated and not directly identifiable to individuals. Option D. Proceed with the feature development, assuming users implicitly consent to data processing for feature enhancement when using the application, and implement basic anonymization techniques. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the feature development, assuming users implicitly consent to data processing for feature enhancement when using the application, and implement basic anonymization techniques. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the perceived immediate benefits of a new feature with the potential long-term risks and compliance obligations. The developer must consider not only technical feasibility, but also the implications for user privacy and data security within the Cisco Webex ecosystem, adhering strictly to the DEVWBX exam's regulatory framework. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and potential impacts before committing resources. This proactive stance ensures that any developed feature aligns with the principles of data protection and user consent, which are fundamental to responsible application development. By engaging stakeholders early and conducting a comprehensive risk assessment, the developer demonstrates a commitment to ethical development and regulatory compliance, thereby mitigating potential legal and reputational damage. This aligns with the spirit of the DEVWBX certification, which emphasizes building secure and compliant applications. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on rapid feature deployment without considering data privacy implications would fail to meet regulatory requirements. Specifically, It could violate principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, where personal data is collected and processed only for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes. Another incorrect approach that bypasses user consent mechanisms for data collection would directly contravene regulations requiring informed consent for processing personal data. This failure to obtain explicit consent is a significant ethical and regulatory breach. A third incorrect approach that neglects to implement robust security measures for data handling would expose users to potential data breaches, violating the duty of care owed to users and potentially contravening data security mandates. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of project goals and constraints, including regulatory requirements. This should be followed by a comprehensive impact assessment, considering technical, business, ethical, and legal dimensions. Stakeholder consultation is crucial throughout the process to gather diverse perspectives and ensure alignment. Finally, a phased approach to development, with built-in checkpoints for compliance and risk review, allows for iterative refinement and ensures that the final product is both functional and compliant. Question 5. Implementation of a new Cisco Webex application feature that requires access to user presence information and message content for real-time status updates and intelligent response suggestions. What is the most compliant and ethically sound approach to data handling? Option A. Design the feature to collect presence information and message content, and justify the collection by stating that it is necessary for improving the overall user experience, without requiring specific consent for each data type. Option B. Implement the feature by default, collecting presence and message content, and provide users with an opt-out mechanism if they do not wish for their data to be used. Option C. Proceed with collecting presence information and message content without explicit user consent, assuming that users implicitly agree to data usage by using the application, and rely on general security measures to protect the data. Option D. Develop the feature to collect presence information and message content only after obtaining explicit, informed consent from the user, clearly detailing the purpose and scope of data usage, and implement robust encryption and access controls for the collected data. The correct answer is B. Implement the feature by default, collecting presence and message content, and provide users with an opt-out mechanism if they do not wish for their data to be used. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data privacy and security when developing applications for Cisco Webex, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive user information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the functionality of the application with the stringent requirements of data protection regulations, ensuring that user data is processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. Developers must navigate the complexities of obtaining explicit consent, minimizing data collection, and implementing robust security measures to prevent unauthorized access or disclosure. The correct approach emphasizes a privacy by design and privacy by default methodology. This involves proactively embedding data protection principles into the application's architecture from the outset. It prioritizes obtaining explicit, informed consent from users before collecting or processing any personal data, clearly outlining what data is collected, why, and how it will be used. Furthermore, it advocates for data minimization, collecting only what is strictly necessary for the application's intended purpose, and implementing strong encryption and access controls to safeguard the data. This aligns with best professional practices by demonstrating a commitment to user privacy and regulatory compliance, thereby building trust and mitigating legal and reputational risks. An incorrect approach that fails to obtain explicit consent before data collection is a direct violation of data protection principles, treats user data as implicitly available, disregarding the user's right to control their personal information. This can lead to significant regulatory penalties, including fines and damage to the organization's reputation. Another incorrect approach that collects more data than is necessary for the application's core functionality, without a clear and justifiable purpose, also constitutes a failure. This overcollection increases the attack surface and the potential impact of a data breach, and it may not be justifiable under data minimization principles. Finally, an approach that neglects to implement adequate security measures, such as encryption or access controls, leaves user data vulnerable to unauthorized access, breaches, and misuse, which is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable data protection regulations. This involves identifying all personal data that will be processed, assessing the risks associated with that processing, and designing the application to minimize those risks. The framework should include steps for obtaining informed consent, implementing data minimization techniques, and establishing robust security protocols. Regular review and auditing of data handling practices are also crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and adapt to evolving threats and regulations. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a newly developed Cisco Webex application will handle sensitive user communication metadata to ensure compliance with data protection regulations and maintain user trust. Which of the following approaches to data handling is most appropriate? Option A. Store all sensitive user communication metadata in plain text within the application's database to facilitate quick retrieval and analysis by all authorized application administrators. Option B. Implement a single, broad access permission for all users of the application to view and export sensitive user communication metadata without specific restrictions. Option C. Encrypt sensitive user communication metadata using industry-standard algorithms both in transit and at rest. Implement granular role-based access controls for authorized personnel, and obtain explicit, informed user consent for all data collection and processing activities. Option D. Rely on users implicitly agreeing to the collection and processing of their sensitive user communication metadata by simply installing and using the application, without any explicit consent mechanism. The correct answer is C. Encrypt sensitive user communication metadata using industry-standard algorithms both in transit and at rest. Implement granular role-based access controls for authorized personnel, and obtain explicit, informed user consent for all data collection and processing activities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data privacy and security when developing applications for Cisco Webex, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive user information. The challenge lies in balancing the functionality and user experience of the application with the stringent requirements of data protection regulations. Developers must make informed decisions about data storage, access control, and consent mechanisms to ensure compliance and maintain user trust. The potential for data breaches or misuse of information necessitates a proactive and compliant approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing robust data encryption both in transit and at rest, coupled with granular access controls and clear user consent mechanisms. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that only necessary data is collected and processed for defined purposes. By encrypting data, the application protects it from unauthorized access, even in the event of a security incident. Granular access controls ensure that only authorized personnel or systems can access specific data, further mitigating risk. Obtaining explicit user consent for data collection and processing is a fundamental requirement of data protection laws, empowering users and ensuring transparency. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core tenets of data privacy and security mandated by regulatory frameworks, fostering trust and minimizing legal and reputational risks. Incorrect approach is analysis. Storing sensitive user data in plain text without any form of encryption is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly violates data protection principles that mandate the security of personal data. It exposes users to a high risk of identity theft and other harms if a data breach occurs, leading to severe legal penalties and loss of user confidence. Implementing a broad, all-or-nothing access policy for all application users, regardless of their role or need, is also a failure. This approach disregards the principle of least privilege, which is a cornerstone of secure system design and data protection. It increases the attack surface by granting unnecessary access to sensitive information, potentially leading to accidental or malicious data exposure. Relying solely on implicit consent, such as by including a brief mention in a lengthy terms of service document that users are unlikely to read, is a failure to obtain valid consent. Data protection regulations typically require explicit, informed, and unambiguous consent. Implicit consent in such a manner is often deemed insufficient and legally invalid, exposing the application and its developers to regulatory action and user complaints. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing applications for Cisco Webex must adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying potential data privacy and security risks associated with the application's features and data handling. 2. Understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the target user base and data types, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, depending on the exam's implied jurisdiction. 3. Designing and implementing technical and organizational measures to mitigate identified risks, prioritizing data minimization, security by design, and privacy by design. 4. Establishing clear processes for obtaining and managing user consent. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating security and privacy practices in response to evolving threats and regulatory changes. 6. Prioritizing transparency with users regarding data collection, processing, and protection. Question 7. The audit findings indicate that a custom Cisco Webex application, designed to integrate with Webex meetings for real-time participant feedback, may be collecting and storing more participant information than is strictly necessary for its core functionality, without explicit and granular user consent for each data point. This raises concerns about potential violations of data privacy regulations. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the development team? Option A. Update the application's privacy policy to broadly state that participant data may be collected for service improvement and continue with existing data handling practices. Option B. Conduct a detailed data audit to identify all personal data collected, the specific purpose for each data point, and the legal basis for its collection. Then implement necessary changes to ensure compliance with data minimization and consent requirements. Option C. Immediately cease all data collection within the application and inform users of the audit findings while a comprehensive review is conducted. Option D. Prioritize the development of new features for the application, as the current functionality has been in production for some time and is presumed to be compliant until proven otherwise by a formal regulatory body. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease all data collection within the application and inform users of the audit findings while a comprehensive review is conducted. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential breach of data privacy regulations concerning the handling of user information within a Cisco Webex application. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires developers to balance the functionality and user experience of their applications with stringent legal and ethical obligations regarding data protection. The specific jurisdiction for this exam is not explicitly stated, but for the purpose of this question, we will assume a framework similar to GDPR or CCPA, which emphasizes user consent, data minimization, and secure handling of personal data. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the application's data handling practices against the relevant data privacy regulations. This includes identifying what personal data is collected, the legal basis for its collection, e.g., explicit user consent, how it is stored and processed, and the mechanisms for user access and deletion. Implementing robust consent management, data anonymization where possible, and secure data transmission protocols are paramount. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the audit findings by ensuring compliance with data privacy laws, thereby protecting users' rights and avoiding legal repercussions for the organization. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical data stewardship and builds trust with users. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings without a proper investigation, assuming the application is compliant by default. This failure to investigate is a direct ethical and regulatory failure, as it neglects a potential breach of user privacy rights. Another incorrect approach is to implement superficial changes, such as merely updating a privacy policy without altering the underlying data collection or processing mechanisms. This is a regulatory failure because it creates a false sense of compliance while the actual data handling practices remain problematic, potentially leading to continued noncompliance and user harm. Finally, an approach that prioritizes feature development over addressing data privacy concerns, even after being alerted by an audit, is an ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for user rights and a lack of commitment to responsible application development. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Acknowledging and taking seriously all audit findings, especially those related to data privacy and security. 2. Initiating a comprehensive internal review to understand the scope and nature of the potential noncompliance. 3. consulting with legal and compliance experts to interpret regulatory requirements accurately. 4. Prioritizing remediation efforts based on the severity of the findings and potential impact on users and the organization. 5. Implementing and thoroughly testing corrective actions to ensure ongoing compliance. 6. Documenting all steps taken and maintaining a continuous monitoring process. Question 8. Operational review demonstrates that a third-party application designed to enhance collaboration within Cisco Webex is experiencing intermittent issues with data synchronization and occasional unauthorized access attempts. The application utilizes API keys for authentication to interact with Webex services. What is the most secure and professionally responsible approach for the development team to address these issues and ensure the integrity of the integration? Option A. Request broad administrative permissions for the application to ensure it has access to all necessary data for seamless synchronization, without specific justification for each permission. Option B. Implement server-side validation of API keys. Enforce the principle of least privilege by requesting only necessary permissions, and implement rate limiting for API calls to prevent abuse. Option C. Focus on improving the user interface and adding new features, assuming that the API key management is a minor concern that can be addressed later. Option D. Rely solely on client-side validation of API keys, as this is sufficient for most integrations and simplifies development. The correct answer is B. Implement server-side validation of API keys, enforce the principle of least privilege by requesting only necessary permissions, and implement rate limiting for API calls to prevent abuse. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of integrating third-party applications with Cisco Webex, particularly when considering data privacy and security implications. Developers must navigate the nuances of the Webex APIs and the specific data handling requirements mandated by the Cisco Webex platform's terms of service and any applicable data protection regulations. The need for robust authentication and authorization mechanisms is paramount to prevent unauthorized access to sensitive user data within Webex. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a secure and compliant integration by leveraging Cisco's recommended authentication methods and adhering to data minimization principles. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect user privacy and maintain the integrity of the Webex platform. By explicitly validating API keys and implementing granular access controls, developers ensure that the application only accesses the data it absolutely needs, thereby minimizing the attack surface and reducing the risk of data breaches. This proactive security posture is a cornerstone of responsible software development in regulated environments. An incorrect approach that relies solely on client-side validation of API keys is professionally unacceptable. This is because client-side validation is easily circumvented by malicious actors who can inspect and manipulate client-side code. This failure to implement server-side validation creates a significant security vulnerability, potentially leading to unauthorized access to sensitive Webex data, which would be a direct violation of data protection principles and could have severe legal and reputational consequences. Another incorrect approach that involves requesting broad permissions for the application without a clear justification for each permission is also professionally unsound. This violates the principle of least privilege, a fundamental security best practice. Granting excessive permissions increases the risk of data misuse, even if unintentional, and can lead to compliance issues if the application's data access exceeds what is necessary for its stated functionality. This lack of specificity in permission requests demonstrates a disregard for user privacy and platform security. Finally, an approach that neglects to implement any form of rate limiting for API calls is professionally deficient. While not directly a data access issue, uncontrolled API usage can lead to denial of service conditions, impacting the availability and performance of both the integrated application and the Webex service itself. This can indirectly affect user experience and potentially lead to service disruptions, which is a failure in providing a reliable and robust integration. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the Webex API documentation, a clear definition of the application's functional requirements, and a comprehensive assessment of potential security risks. Developers should always adopt a security-first mindset, implementing robust authentication, authorization, and data handling practices that align with both platform guidelines and relevant data protection regulations. Prioritizing the principle of least privilege and implementing mechanisms to prevent abuse are critical steps in building secure and trustworthy integrations. Question 9. Investigation of the most secure and compliant method for an application to access and process user presence information within Cisco Webex, considering the need to avoid direct manipulation of Webex backend infrastructure and to protect sensitive user data. Option A. Implement a solution that scrapes presence information from the Webex client's user interface, treating it as publicly available data. Option B. Develop a custom integration that directly queries the underlying Webex database to retrieve presence status, bypassing official SDKs for perceived efficiency. Option C. Store user authentication tokens in plain text within the application's configuration files to simplify access to presence data. Option D. Utilize the official Cisco Webex SDKs and APIs specifically designed for accessing presence information, ensuring all data is handled according to documented security protocols. The correct answer is D. Utilize the official Cisco Webex SDKs and APIs specifically designed for accessing presence information, ensuring all data is handled according to documented security protocols. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in developing applications for Cisco Webex, ensuring that the application's integration with Webex services adheres to the platform's security and data handling policies, particularly when dealing with sensitive user information. The professional challenge lies in balancing the desire for rich functionality with the imperative to protect user privacy and comply with Cisco's developer guidelines, which are implicitly tied to the security and privacy expectations of end users and their organizations. Careful judgment is required to select an integration method that is both effective and compliant. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes security and compliance by leveraging Cisco's provided SDKs and APIs. These tools are designed with built-in security measures and adhere to Cisco's established data handling protocols. By using these official channels, developers ensure that their application interacts with Webex services in a controlled and audited manner, minimizing the risk of unauthorized data access or breaches. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and responsible data stewardship, which are fundamental to professional software development and user trust. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing Webex backend services without using the official SDKs or APIs is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical breach because it bypasses established security controls and auditing mechanisms. Such an action could lead to unauthorized access to sensitive user data, violating privacy regulations and Cisco's terms of service. It demonstrates a disregard for established security best practices and a lack of due diligence in understanding the platform's architecture and security posture. Another incorrect approach that involves storing sensitive user credentials within the application's client-side code is also a critical failure. This exposes user credentials to interception and compromise, directly violating security principles and potentially leading to account takeovers. Ethically, it represents a severe breach of trust with the end user, as their sensitive information is not adequately protected. This approach fails to implement basic security hygiene and demonstrates a profound misunderstanding of secure application development. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of Cisco's developer documentation, including API references, SDK guides, and security best practices. Developers must always prioritize using officially sanctioned integration methods. Before implementing any feature that handles user data, a risk assessment should be conducted to identify potential security vulnerabilities and privacy implications. Consulting with security experts or platform specialists, if available, can further mitigate risks. The guiding principle should always be to build applications that are secure by design and compliant with all relevant platform policies and industry standards. Question 10. What factors determine the appropriate level of access an application should request when integrating with Cisco Webex APIs to retrieve user presence information? Option A. The developer's personal judgment on what presence information would be most beneficial for users, without explicit permission checks. Option B. The availability of presence data through any publicly documented API endpoint, regardless of the application's specific needs. Option C, the broadest possible access to all user presence data to ensure the application has comprehensive information for future features. Option D, the specific use case of the application and the minimum data required to fulfill that use case, as defined by Cisco's API documentation and developer guidelines. The correct answer is D, the specific use case of the application and the minimum data required to fulfill that use case, as defined by Cisco's API documentation and developer guidelines. Explanation: scenario analysis. Developing applications for Cisco Webex and Webex devices, DEVWBX, involves handling sensitive user data and ensuring the integrity of communication platforms. A professionally challenging aspect arises when an application needs to integrate with Webex APIs to access or process user-specific information, such as message content or contact lists. Developers must navigate the complexities of data privacy, security, and compliance with Cisco's own platform policies and any relevant data protection regulations. The challenge lies in balancing the functionality of the application with the imperative to protect user privacy and maintain trust in the platform. This requires a deep understanding of the API's capabilities, limitations, and the data governance principles that underpin Webex. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the Cisco Webex API documentation, specifically focusing on the permissions and scopes required for the intended functionality. This includes understanding the principle of least privilege, where the application only requests the minimum permissions necessary to perform its task. Furthermore, it necessitates consulting Cisco's developer guidelines and terms of service to ensure compliance with their data handling and privacy policies. This approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes security and user privacy by design. By adhering to documented API permissions and platform policies, developers minimize the risk of unauthorized data access, comply with potential regulatory requirements related to data protection. Though specific regulations are not mandated for this exam's jurisdiction, the principle of responsible data handling is universal, and uphold the trust placed in them by users and Cisco. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that all available API endpoints are implicitly permitted for use without explicit authorization or understanding of their data implications. This can lead to overcollection or misuse of user data, violating privacy principles and potentially breaching platform terms of service. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize rapid development and feature implementation over a comprehensive understanding of data access controls and security implications. This might involve making broad API calls without granular permission checks, increasing the attack surface and the risk of data breaches. Third incorrect approach is to ignore or downplay the importance of Cisco's developer guidelines in terms of service, believing that adherence is optional or can be circumvented. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and can lead to severe consequences, including application deactivation, legal repercussions, and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing for Cisco Webex should adopt a proactive and security-conscious mindset. The decision-making process should begin with a clear definition of the application's purpose and the specific data it needs to interact with. This should be followed by an in-depth review of the relevant Cisco Webex API documentation, paying close attention to authentication mechanisms, authorization scopes, and data handling best practices. Developers should always strive to implement the principle of least privilege. Regular consultation of Cisco's developer resources and adherence to their terms of service are non-negotiable. In cases of ambiguity regarding data access or privacy, seeking clarification from Cisco's developer support or legal counsel is a prudent step. This systematic approach ensures that applications are not only functional, but also secure, compliant, and trustworthy. Question 11. When evaluating the integration of a new feature into a Cisco Webex application that requires access to user presence status and message content for real-time analytics, what is the most compliant and ethically sound approach to data handling? Option A. Proceed with accessing both presence status and message content, relying on the user's general acceptance of Webex's overall privacy policy to cover the new feature's data usage. Option B. Develop the feature to access only aggregated, anonymized presence data and to process message content only after explicit, Granular user consent has been obtained for each specific analytical purpose, ensuring data minimization. Option C. Implement the feature by accessing present status and message content directly, assuming that data within the Webex platform is implicitly cleared for such analytical purposes by the platform's terms of service. Option D. Access present status and message content, and store this data indefinitely in a separate, encrypted database for future, unspecified analytical needs, without seeking additional user consent beyond the initial application installation. The correct answer is C. Implement the feature by accessing present status and message content directly, assuming that data within the Webex platform is implicitly cleared for such analytical purposes by the platform's terms of service. Explanation. Scenario analysis. Developing applications for Cisco Webex and Webex devices, DEVWBX, involves handling sensitive user data and integrating with a communication platform. Key challenge arises when an application needs to access or process information that might be subject to data privacy regulations. Developers must ensure their application's data handling practices align with the relevant legal and ethical standards, particularly concerning user consent, data minimization, and secure storage. Failure to do so can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of user trust. Professional challenge lies in balancing the application's functionality with the imperative to protect user privacy and comply with evolving regulatory landscapes. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough assessment of data privacy implications throughout the development lifecycle. This includes identifying all user data the application will access or generate, understanding the purpose of collecting and processing this data, and ensuring that appropriate consent mechanisms are in place. Furthermore, it necessitates implementing robust security measures to protect this data and adhering to the principle of data minimization, collecting only what is strictly necessary for the application's intended function. This aligns with the spirit of data protection regulations, which prioritize user control and the responsible handling of personal information. By embedding privacy by design principles, developers ensure that compliance is not an afterthought but an integral part of the application's architecture. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because Webex is a business communication tool, all data processed within it is automatically exempt from privacy regulations, or that standard business practices are sufficient. This overlooks the specific requirements of data protection laws that may apply to the types of data being handled, regardless of the platform. Another incorrect approach is to implement data handling practices based solely on the perceived technical feasibility or the immediate needs of the application's core features, without a comprehensive review of potential privacy risks or regulatory obligations. This can lead to the inadvertent collection or retention of excessive personal data, violating principles of data minimization and purpose limitation. A further incorrect approach is to rely on generic security measures without specifically addressing the privacy implications of the data being processed, such as failing to implement granular access controls or adequate anonymization techniques where appropriate. This can expose sensitive data to unauthorized access or misuse, even if the data is technically secured. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to data privacy. This involves identifying potential privacy risks early in the development process, assessing their likelihood and impact, and implementing appropriate controls. A key step is to consult relevant data protection guidelines and legal counsel to understand specific obligations. Developers should prioritize building applications with privacy as a core consideration, rather than as an add-on. This includes conducting privacy impact assessments, obtaining informed user consent, and ensuring data is handled securely and ethically throughout its lifecycle. Continuous monitoring and adaptation to new regulations and best practices are also crucial for maintaining compliance and professional integrity. Question 12. The control framework reveals that a new Cisco Webex application is being developed with a tight deadline for feature release. The development team is considering whether to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment before deployment or to defer a detailed security and compliance review until after the initial launch to meet the deadline. Which approach best aligns with responsible application development practices for Cisco Webex applications? Option A. Conduct a superficial risk assessment that only addresses the most obvious and immediate security threats, prioritizing speed over comprehensive coverage. Option B. Rely on post-deployment security patching and updates to address any risks or compliance issues that may arise after the application is live. Option C. Defer a detailed security and compliance review until after the initial feature release, focusing solely on meeting the immediate deadline for deployment. Option D. Integrate a thorough risk assessment and compliance review into the development lifecycle, identifying and mitigating potential vulnerabilities and regulatory gaps during the design and coding phases. The correct answer is D. Integrate a thorough risk assessment and compliance review into the development lifecycle, identifying and mitigating potential vulnerabilities and regulatory gaps during the design and coding phases. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the development team is facing a common dilemma, balancing the urgency of feature delivery with the imperative of robust security and compliance. The DEVWBX exam focuses on developing applications for Cisco Webex, which inherently involves handling sensitive communication data. Therefore, a proactive and integrated approach to risk assessment is not merely a best practice but a regulatory expectation. The challenge lies in ensuring that security and compliance are not afterthoughts but are woven into the fabric of the development lifecycle, especially when faced with time constraints. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it embeds risk assessment into the early stages of the development process. By identifying potential vulnerabilities and compliance gaps during the design and development phases, developers can proactively mitigate risks, reducing the likelihood of costly rework, data breaches, or regulatory penalties later on. This aligns with the principles of Secure Development Lifecycle, SDL, and the general expectation that applications handling sensitive information must be designed with security and privacy in mind from inception. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining user trust and adhering to the spirit of any applicable data protection regulations, even if not explicitly detailed in the exam scope, as the principles are universal to secure application development. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate feature deployment without a thorough risk assessment fails to uphold professional responsibility. This can lead to the introduction of security flaws that could be exploited, potentially resulting in unauthorized access to sensitive Webex communications, which would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such a failure could expose the organization to legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of customer confidence. Another incorrect approach, which involves conducting a superficial risk assessment that only addresses obvious threats, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach neglects the nuanced and evolving threat landscape, leaving the application vulnerable to sophisticated attacks or unforeseen compliance issues. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adequately protect user data and the integrity of the Webex platform. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This begins with understanding the context of the application, including the type of data it will handle and the intended user base. Next, potential threats and vulnerabilities should be identified, considering both technical weaknesses and potential compliance issues. These risks should then be analyzed and prioritized based on their likelihood and potential impact. Mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented, and these should be continuously monitored and reviewed throughout the application's lifecycle. This iterative process ensures that security and compliance remain integral to the development and ongoing maintenance of the application. Question 13. Stakeholder feedback indicates a desire for rapid deployment of new collaborative features within the Cisco Webex application. While the development team is eager to deliver these features quickly, there are concerns about potential security implications arising from the new code. Which of the following approaches best addresses the inherent risks associated with introducing new functionality in a secure and responsible manner? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for security to the end users, providing them with guidelines on how to secure their own environments. Option B. Prioritize immediate feature delivery and rely on post-deployment security patching to address any vulnerabilities that may be discovered later. Option C. Focus solely on implementing the new features as requested, assuming that the existing security framework will adequately protect against any new risks. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities, analyze their impact, and implement appropriate mitigation strategies before deployment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities, analyze their impact, and implement appropriate mitigation strategies before deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for application functionality with the long-term implications of security vulnerabilities. The DEVWBX exam focuses on developing applications for Cisco Webex and Webex devices, implying a need to adhere to best practices in application development, including robust risk assessment. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential security risks that could impact the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data processed through the Webex platform. Careful judgment is required to prioritize security without unduly hindering innovation or user experience. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it systematically identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential risks before they can be exploited. This proactive stance aligns with the principles of secure software development and the implicit regulatory expectations for applications handling sensitive communications. By conducting a thorough risk assessment, developers can implement appropriate security controls, such as input validation, secure authentication, and data encryption, thereby minimizing the likelihood and impact of security incidents. This approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to protecting user data and system integrity, which are paramount in regulated environments. An incorrect approach that skips or superficially addresses the risk assessment phase is professionally unacceptable due to several regulatory and ethical failures. Firstly, it violates the principle of security by design, which mandates that security considerations are integrated from the outset of the development lifecycle. This failure can lead to significant security vulnerabilities that, if exploited, could result in data breaches, service disruptions, and reputational damage. Ethically, it represents a disregard for the responsibility to protect users and their data. Furthermore, depending on the specific jurisdiction's data protection laws, which are not specified here but are generally implied in professional development contexts, such negligence could lead to non-compliance with regulations concerning data security and privacy, potentially resulting in fines and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on feature development without considering potential security implications fails to acknowledge the interconnectedness of functionality and security. This oversight can lead to the introduction of vulnerabilities that are difficult and costly to remediate later in the development cycle or after deployment. It demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to anticipate the potential negative consequences of insecure code. A third incorrect approach that relies on post-deployment security patching as the primary mitigation strategy is also professionally unsound. While patching is essential, it is a reactive measure. Relying on it as the main defense mechanism implies an acceptance of known or unknown vulnerabilities in the deployed application, which is a significant risk. This approach can lead to prolonged periods of exposure, increasing the likelihood of exploitation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This includes 1. Threat identification, brainstorming potential threats to the application and its data. 2. Vulnerability analysis, identifying weaknesses in the application that could be exploited by these threats. 3. Impact assessment, determining the potential consequences if a threat exploits a vulnerability. 4. Risk prioritization, ranking risks based on their likelihood and impact. 5. Mitigation planning, developing and implementing strategies to reduce or eliminate prioritized risks. 6. Continuous monitoring, regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment as the application evolves and new threats emerge. This systematic process ensures that security is an integral part of the development lifecycle, leading to more robust and secure applications. Question 14. Strategic planning requires a developer building a new integration for Cisco Webex to determine the most responsible method for handling meeting-related data. The integration aims to provide real-time transcription services for meeting participants. What approach best balances functionality with data privacy and security considerations within the Cisco Webex developer ecosystem? Option A. Access all available meeting content and participant metadata through the Webex API to ensure comprehensive transcription accuracy and user identification. Option B. Utilize publicly available meeting information and avoid any direct API calls that access sensitive meeting content to prevent potential data breaches. Option C. Store all meeting recordings and participant lists indefinitely within the application's backend for future analysis and auditing purposes, regardless of user consent. Option D. Design the integration to request only the audio stream necessary for transcription, process it in real time, and discard it immediately after transcription, with clear user consent mechanisms in place. The correct answer is A. Access all available meeting content and participant metadata through the Webex API to ensure comprehensive transcription accuracy and user identification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the integration of third-party applications with Cisco Webex, specifically concerning data privacy and compliance within the context of developing applications for the DEVWBX exam. The challenge lies in balancing the functionality and user experience of an integrated application with the stringent requirements for handling sensitive user data, such as meeting content and participant information. Developers must navigate the complexities of Webex APIs, understand the scope of data accessible, and ensure that their application's data handling practices align with Cisco's developer guidelines and any applicable data protection regulations. Even if not explicitly stated as a primary focus of the DEVWBX exam itself, the underlying principles of responsible development are paramount. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintended data exposure or misuse. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the Cisco Webex API documentation and developer guidelines to understand precisely what data points are accessible and how they can be utilized. This includes identifying any data that is considered sensitive or personally identifiable information, PI. The developer must then design the application to request only the minimum necessary data for its intended functionality, implement robust security measures for data in transit and at rest, and clearly communicate data usage policies to end users. This aligns with the principle of data minimization and privacy by design, which are foundational to responsible software development and implicitly expected within a professional certification context like DEVWBX, even if specific regulatory frameworks are not the exam's sole focus. Adhering to these guidelines ensures the application is not only functional, but also trustworthy and compliant with best practices for data handling. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that all data accessible through the Webex API is freely usable without specific consideration for privacy. This could lead to the collection and storage of sensitive meeting content or participant details without explicit user consent or a clear business justification, violating principles of data privacy and potentially leading to breaches of trust and compliance issues. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize feature development over security and data handling protocols. This might involve implementing features that inadvertently expose user data or fail to adequately protect it from unauthorized access. Such an approach neglects the ethical responsibility of a developer to safeguard user information and could result in significant reputational damage and legal repercussions for the organization. A third incorrect approach is to rely on assumptions about data access and usage without consulting official documentation. This can lead to misinterpretations of API capabilities and limitations, resulting in applications that either fail to function as intended or, more critically, violate data privacy by accessing or processing data beyond what is permitted or necessary. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a privacy-first mindset when developing applications that interact with user data. This involves a proactive approach to understanding data flows, potential risks, and compliance requirements from the outset of the development lifecycle. The decision-making process should prioritize 1. Thorough documentation review, 2. Data minimization, 3. Secure coding practices, 4. Transparent user communication, and 5. Continuous security assessment. When faced with ambiguity, seeking clarification from platform providers or legal counsel is a sign of professional diligence. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that a third-party software development kit, SDK, is available that promises to significantly enhance the functionality of a custom Cisco Webex application by enabling advanced real-time analytics. However, the SDK's documentation is vague regarding its data handling practices and the specific types of user data it accesses. What is the most ethically responsible and professionally sound approach to integrating this SDK? Option A. Integrate the SDK and plan to address any discovered privacy or security issues reactively after deployment. Option B. Integrate the SDK without any review, assuming Cisco's platform security will inherently protect against any third-party vulnerabilities. Option C. Integrate the SDK immediately, relying on the third-party vendor's assurances that their product is compliant and secure. Option D. Conduct a thorough, independent security and privacy review of the SDK and its vendor before integration, ensuring it aligns with data protection principles and Webex platform guidelines. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough, independent security and privacy review of the SDK and its vendor before integration, ensuring it aligns with data protection principles and Webex platform guidelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical responsibility of a developer to protect user privacy and data integrity when integrating third-party services into Cisco Webex applications. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to enhance application functionality with the imperative to avoid introducing vulnerabilities or engaging in practices that could compromise sensitive user information. The developer must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance with data protection principles and maintain user trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough, independent security and privacy review of the third-party SDK before integration. This aligns with best professional practices and ethical guidelines for software development, particularly in regulated environments. It represents best professional practice because it proactively identifies potential risks, ensures compliance with data handling policies, and safeguards user privacy. This approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible development, which are critical for maintaining the integrity of the Webex platform and user confidence. It also implicitly adheres to principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that only necessary and vetted data is processed. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with integration based solely on the third-party vendor's assurances of compliance. This is ethically and professionally unacceptable because it abdicates the developer's responsibility for due diligence. It fails to acknowledge that vendor claims require independent verification and can lead to regulatory violations if the vendor's assurances are inaccurate or incomplete. This approach risks exposing users to data breaches or unauthorized data usage, violating principles of data protection and user consent. Another incorrect approach is to integrate the SDK without any review, assuming that Cisco's platform security will inherently protect against any third-party vulnerabilities. This is a critical ethical and professional failure. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the shared responsibility model in software development and security. Relying solely on platform-level security is insufficient when introducing external code that has direct access to application data and user interactions. This can lead to severe data breaches and reputational damage, as the developer has failed to implement necessary safeguards at the application layer. A further incorrect approach is to integrate the SDK and then address any discovered privacy or security issues reactively. This is a reactive and irresponsible stance. It prioritizes speed of development over user safety and data protection. Reactive measures are often less effective and can be significantly more costly to remediate than proactive prevention. This approach violates the ethical principle of do no harm by potentially exposing users to risks before any issues are identified and corrected. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and risk-aware approach to third-party integrations. This involves establishing a clear process for vetting external components, including security and privacy assessments, code reviews where feasible, and understanding the data flows and permissions required by the integration. When faced with such a decision, a developer should ask, what are the potential risks to user data and privacy associated with this integration, and what steps can I take to mitigate them before deployment? This framework encourages a thorough evaluation of the impact on users and the platform, ensuring that functionality is enhanced responsibly and ethically. Question 16. Operational review demonstrates that the integration application for Cisco Webex is experiencing delays in updating user presence information across multiple connected services. This is impacting the ability of other integrated applications to accurately reflect user availability. What is the most effective approach to optimize this process, while adhering to best practices for application development within the Cisco Webex ecosystem. Option A. Focus on redesigning the user interface elements related to presence display to make the application appear more responsive, without altering the underlying data update process. Option B. Analyze the current API call patterns for presence updates, identify redundant or inefficient calls, and refactor the application logic to consolidate updates or leverage Webex APIs more efficiently, prioritizing accuracy and minimal latency. Option C. Implement a simplified presence update mechanism that reduces the frequency of API calls, even if it means occasional inaccuracies in user availability across all integrated services. Option D. Introduce a new, custom presence tracking system independent of Webex APIs to manage availability information, bypassing the existing integration for faster updates. The correct answer is B. Analyze the current API call patterns for presence updates, identify redundant or inefficient calls, and refactor the application logic to consolidate updates or leverage Webex APIs more efficiently, prioritizing accuracy and minimal latency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to balance efficiency gains with the integrity and security of sensitive data within the Cisco Webex ecosystem. The DEVWBX certification focuses on developing applications that integrate with Webex, implying a responsibility to ensure these applications adhere to best practices for data handling and process optimization, without compromising user experience or compliance. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing process improvements that are both effective and compliant with the implicit regulatory and security expectations surrounding enterprise communication platforms. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven evaluation of existing processes before implementing changes. This aligns with principles of responsible development and deployment, ensuring that any optimization is based on measurable impact and minimizes the risk of unintended consequences. By focusing on user feedback and performance metrics, developers can ensure that process improvements genuinely enhance the application's utility and efficiency without introducing vulnerabilities or violating data privacy guidelines that are implicitly expected in enterprise software development. This methodical approach fosters trust and reliability in the developed applications. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reducing the number of API calls without understanding their impact on data accuracy or user experience is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to incomplete data synchronization, delayed notifications, or a degraded user experience, potentially violating service-level agreements or user expectations. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established security protocols for the sake of speed introduces significant regulatory and ethical risks. Such actions could lead to data breaches, noncompliance with data protection regulations, even if not explicitly stated in the exam. General principles of data security apply, and severe reputational damage. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes aesthetic changes over functional optimization fails to address the core objective of process improvement, wasting development resources and potentially overlooking critical areas where efficiency gains are truly needed. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives, followed by a thorough analysis of the current state using relevant metrics. Potential solutions should be evaluated for their impact on efficiency, user experience, security, and compliance. Pilot testing and iterative refinement are crucial steps to validate improvements before full deployment. This structured approach ensures that development efforts are aligned with business goals and adhere to the highest professional and ethical standards. Question 17. Quality control measures reveal that a development team has implemented a new caching mechanism to improve the response times of a Cisco Webex integration. This optimization was introduced without a formal review against the DEVWBX syllabus or comprehensive regression testing, relying instead on anecdotal feedback from a few developers that performance had improved. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance and application integrity? Option A. Implement the caching mechanism and rely on post-deployment monitoring tools to identify any potential compliance or functional issues. Option B. Trust the anecdotal feedback from the development team and continue with the current implementation, assuming the optimization is safe. Option C. Immediately roll back the caching mechanism and conduct a thorough review of the DEVWBX syllabus, followed by rigorous testing before reimplementation. Option D. Proceed with deploying the caching mechanism to production, as performance improvements are generally beneficial and can be monitored for issues. The correct answer is C. Immediately roll back the caching mechanism and conduct a thorough review of the DEVWBX syllabus, followed by rigorous testing before reimplementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge in software development for regulated environments, ensuring that process optimizations, while aiming for efficiency, do not inadvertently introduce risks that could lead to non-compliance with Cisco's Webex development guidelines and potentially impact data integrity or user privacy. The challenge lies in balancing the desire for faster development cycles and improved resource utilization with the absolute necessity of adhering to established quality and security standards. Developers must demonstrate a thorough understanding of how changes, even seemingly minor ones, can have ripple effects on the application's behavior and its compliance posture. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of the proposed optimization against the DEVWBX syllabus, specifically focusing on areas related to process optimization. This includes evaluating how the optimization impacts data handling, security protocols, and integration points with Webex services. Best professional practice dictates that any optimization must be validated through rigorous testing, including unit, integration, and regression testing, to ensure it does not break existing functionality or introduce new vulnerabilities. Furthermore, adherence to the DEVWBX guidelines means ensuring that the optimization aligns with Cisco's recommended practices for building robust and secure Webex applications, thereby maintaining the integrity and reliability of the application. This proactive validation and documentation process is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing an optimization without a thorough review against the DEVWBX syllabus is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the established framework designed to ensure application quality and compliance, potentially leading to applications that do not meet Cisco's standards or, worse, compromise user data or system security. Deploying an optimization based solely on anecdotal evidence or peer recommendation, without empirical validation through testing, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach disregards the need for objective proof that the optimization is effective and safe, risking the introduction of bugs or performance degradation. Relying on post-deployment monitoring alone to catch issues is a reactive and insufficient strategy. It fails to prevent potential problems and can lead to significant disruption and reputational damage. This approach demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to uphold the professional responsibility to deliver reliable and compliant software. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing for Cisco Webex must adopt a mindset of compliance by design. This means integrating regulatory and guideline adherence into every stage of the development lifecycle. When considering process optimizations, the decision-making framework should prioritize 1. Understanding the specific requirements and constraints outlined in the DEVWBX syllabus. 2. Conducting a risk assessment of the proposed optimization, considering its potential impact on functionality, security, and compliance. 3. Implementing a robust testing strategy to validate the optimization's effectiveness and safety. 4. Documenting all changes and their validation thoroughly. This systematic approach ensures that efficiency gains are achieved without compromising the integrity and compliance of the developed applications. Question 18. The performance metrics show a slight degradation in call quality for a subset of users during peak hours. To diagnose this, should the application analyze the content of individual user conversations to identify patterns in the degradation, or should it focus on aggregated, anonymized network and device data to pinpoint the cause? Option A. Analyze the content of individual user conversations to identify patterns in the degradation. Option B. Focus on aggregated, anonymized network and device data to pinpoint the cause. Option C. Share raw performance logs, including user identifiers, with external network monitoring tools. Option D. Implement a feature to record all user conversations and store them for later analysis. Correct answer is B. Focus on aggregated, anonymized network and device data to pinpoint the cause. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the technical requirements of developing a Cisco Webex application with the implicit need to ensure user privacy and data security, which are paramount in any software development context, especially when dealing with communication platforms. The challenge lies in interpreting performance metrics in a way that doesn't inadvertently compromise user trust or violate data handling principles, even if not explicitly codified in the DEVWBX exam's specific regulatory framework. The DEVWBX exam focuses on developing applications for Cisco Webex and Webex devices, implying a need to adhere to best practices for application development within that ecosystem. While the exam syllabus itself doesn't stipulate specific external regulations, the principles of responsible development, including data privacy and security, are inherent to building trustworthy applications. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes user privacy by avoiding the collection or analysis of personally identifiable information, PI, unless absolutely necessary, and with explicit user consent. This aligns with the general ethical expectations of software developers and the implicit trust users place in applications handling their communications. By focusing on aggregated, anonymized data for performance analysis, the developer respects user privacy and minimizes the risk of data breaches or misuse, thereby building a more robust and trustworthy application. This proactive stance on privacy is a cornerstone of professional software development. An incorrect approach that involves analyzing individual user conversation content for performance metrics would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Even without specific exam-mandated regulations, such an action would violate fundamental principles of user privacy and data confidentiality. It could expose sensitive information, leading to reputational damage for the developer and Cisco, and potentially legal repercussions if broader data protection laws were considered in a real-world scenario. Another incorrect approach, such as sharing raw performance logs containing user identifiers with third parties without explicit consent, would also be a severe ethical lapse and a potential breach of trust, as it exposes user data to unauthorized access and potential misuse. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a layered approach. First, understand the core functionality and data requirements of the application. Second, identify any potential privacy implications of the data being handled. Third, consult any available guidelines or best practices related to the platform, in this case, Cisco Webex development and general software development ethics. Fourth, prioritize user privacy and data security, opting for anonymized or aggregated data whenever possible. Finally, if there is any doubt about the appropriateness of data handling, err on the side of caution and seek clarification or implement more stringent privacy controls. Question 19. System analysis indicates that a stakeholder requires enhanced debugging capabilities for a Cisco Webex application to identify and resolve intermittent issues affecting message delivery. The stakeholder has requested direct access to the raw content of user messages during debugging sessions to pinpoint the exact point of failure. Considering the regulatory framework for developing applications for Cisco Webex, which approach best balances the need for effective debugging with the imperative to protect user privacy and data security. Option A. Implement a secure logging mechanism that captures anonymized or aggregated message metadata and error information, accessible only to authorized developers under strict access controls, and provides tools for simulating message flows for testing. Option B. Develop a separate, unencrypted debugging channel that allows unrestricted access to message content, bypassing the application's standard security protocols. Option C. Require end users to explicitly consent to the sharing of their message content for each individual debugging session initiated by the stakeholder. Option D. Grant the stakeholder direct, real-time access to the raw content of all user messages within the application's scope for the duration of the debugging period, with a general disclaimer about data usage. The correct answer is A. Implement a secure logging mechanism that captures anonymized or aggregated message metadata and error information, accessible only to authorized developers under strict access controls, and provides tools for simulating message flows for testing. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data privacy and security when developing applications for Cisco Webex. The core difficulty lies in balancing the functionality and user experience of the application with the stringent requirements of data protection regulations. Developers must ensure that sensitive information handled by the Webex application is processed, stored, and transmitted in a manner that complies with applicable laws, preventing unauthorized access, disclosure, or modification. The stakeholders' request for direct access to user message content, even for debugging, introduces a significant risk of violating privacy principles and potentially breaching data protection laws. Careful judgment is required to identify a solution that meets the stakeholders' needs without compromising user trust or legal compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes data privacy and security by implementing a mechanism that allows for controlled, anonymized, or aggregated data access for debugging purposes, rather than direct access to raw message content. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are fundamental to data protection regulations. By abstracting the sensitive data and providing access only to necessary, non-identifiable information, the application adheres to the spirit and letter of privacy laws. This approach ensures that debugging can occur without exposing individual user communications, thereby maintaining user confidentiality and preventing potential legal repercussions. It demonstrates best professional practice by embedding privacy by design principles into the development lifecycle. Incorrect approaches analysis. Granting direct access to raw user message content for debugging purposes represents a severe regulatory and ethical failure. It directly violates data privacy principles by exposing sensitive personal communications without explicit consent or a legitimate, legally defined basis. This could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of user trust. Such an approach fails to uphold the duty of care owed to users regarding their data. Implementing a solution that relies on end-user consent for every debugging session, while seemingly addressing consent, is often impractical and still carries risks. The complexity of obtaining informed consent for each instance of data access, especially in a dynamic debugging environment, can be burdensome and may not fully satisfy regulatory requirements for data processing. Furthermore, it places an undue burden on the end user and may not be feasible for all types of debugging scenarios. This approach can be seen as a failure to proactively design for privacy. Developing a separate, less secure debugging channel that bypasses standard security protocols is a critical security and regulatory failure. This creates a significant vulnerability that could be exploited by malicious actors, leading to data breaches and noncompliance with data security mandates. It demonstrates a disregard for the integrity of the system and the protection of user data. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing applications for Cisco Webex must adopt a risk-based approach to data handling. When faced with requests that could compromise user privacy or data security, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying potential privacy and security risks associated with the request. 2. Consulting relevant data protection regulations and internal security policies. 3. Evaluating alternative solutions that achieve the desired outcome with minimal risk. 4. Prioritizing privacy by design and security by design principles throughout the development process. 5. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them, especially when deviating from standard practices or when implementing risk mitigation strategies. 6. Seeking legal and compliance review for any proposed solutions that involve handling sensitive data. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that users are increasingly concerned about how their personal data is handled within collaboration applications. When developing new features for Cisco Webex, what is the most responsible approach to ensure user privacy and data security from the outset? Option A. Implement robust privacy and security controls as an integral part of the feature design and development process, adhering to privacy by design principles. Option B. Assign all privacy and security responsibilities to a dedicated compliance team with minimal developer involvement in the design phase. Option C. Rely solely on the inherent security features of the Cisco Webex platform without implementing application-specific privacy measures. Option D. Focus on rapid feature deployment to meet market demand, with plans to address privacy and security concerns in a subsequent update. Correct answer is A. Implement robust privacy and security controls as an integral part of the feature design and development process, adhering to privacy by design principles. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for feature delivery with the long-term implications of data privacy and security, particularly within the context of developing applications for Cisco Webex. Developers must navigate the complexities of user data handling, ensuring compliance with relevant regulations without stifling innovation or user experience. The pressure to release new features quickly can create a conflict with the meticulous planning and implementation required for robust security and privacy controls. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes proactive integration of privacy by design principles. This aligns with the spirit of regulations like GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which, while not explicitly stated as the sole jurisdiction for this exam, represents a global standard for data protection that influences best practices in application development. By embedding privacy considerations from the outset, developers ensure that data collection, processing, and storage are inherently secure and compliant. This approach minimizes the risk of future costly remediation, reputational damage, and legal penalties. It demonstrates a commitment to user trust and responsible data stewardship, which are critical for the success of any application, especially one integrated into a communication platform like Webex. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that prioritizes feature deployment over privacy controls, with the intention of addressing privacy later, is professionally unacceptable. This represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It violates the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, as data may be collected without adequate consideration for its privacy implications. This reactive stance increases the likelihood of data breaches, non-compliance with data protection laws, and potential fines. It erodes user trust and can lead to severe reputational damage. Another incorrect approach involves assuming that existing Webex platform security measures are sufficient without independent verification or specific application-level controls. While Cisco Webex has robust security, each application developed for it has its own data handling logic and potential vulnerabilities. Relying solely on the platform's security without considering the application's unique data flows and processing is a failure to conduct due diligence. This can lead to unintended data exposure or misuse, even if the underlying platform is secure. Finally, an approach that delegates all privacy and security responsibilities to a separate team without developer involvement is also flawed. While specialized teams are crucial, developers are on the front lines of data handling. A lack of direct developer engagement in privacy and security design leads to a disconnect between implementation and policy. This can result in features being built in ways that are difficult or impossible to secure or make compliant later, creating friction and increasing the risk of errors. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a privacy by design and by default mindset. This involves understanding the data lifecycle within the application, identifying potential privacy risks at each stage, and implementing technical and organizational measures to mitigate those risks. Regular consultation with legal and compliance experts, continuous training on data protection best practices, and a commitment to iterative security and privacy reviews throughout the development lifecycle are essential. When faced with competing priorities, the long-term implications of privacy and security should always be given significant weight, as a breach or non-compliance can have far more severe consequences than a delayed feature release.